Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the closing general session of the 21st Annual Oxford House National Convention. I think it's safe to say that we have all had a tremendous time and once again renewed our faith in this simple system of living together and helping each other stay clean and sober. This year's theme, you'll recall, was about self-reliance and self-respect. Self-reliance and self-respect don't come about by accident. There is no magic wand that suddenly gives it to you. It's something that is earned, and it's earned by following a system of operation that is carefully calibrated to bring out self-reliance and self-respect in each of us. Jane, who heavily edited the part of the program that relates to self-reliance, self-respect, insisted on including a reference to last year's theme, and that made a lot of sense because last year's theme was recovery, fellowship, and fun. And I think from the days that Whit and I were first getting clean and sober 40-some years ago plus a few months for Whit, we recognized that if we couldn't figure out how to have fun while we're clean and sober, we weren't going to stay clean and sober. And that's part of the secret of recovery. Part of the secret is getting out of the hellhole that we're in when we're in active addiction. But the other part of the secret is that once we get out of that hellhole, we have to figure out how to enjoy life. And as you look at Oxford House literature over time, you find that there was lots of references to comfortable sobriety. Well, nobody was talking about comfortable sobriety back in those days. But we've talked about it right from the beginning, that you somehow have to enjoy life, have fun. And that we did in that first Oxford House. And we hope in every Oxford House that followed. Even though in the given life of an Oxford House there'll be ups and downs, the bottom line is that if everybody follows the manual, follows the system of operation, a house will right itself, and it will provide the opportunity for the individuals living there to enjoy life. One of the things that Monsignor Tolentino noticed as he was here for the first morning session, he says, "My God, all you people seem to enjoy each other. Everybody seems to be having a good time." Yes, that's true. And I think he was a little envious. He probably thought to himself, if we could make the Catholic Church like Oxford House, my God, we'd conquer the world. We in Oxford House, though, have a great advantage that congregations for religious organizations don't have. And that is, for our situation, we have all been through hell. It ain't no fun to be addicted. It ain't no fun because when you get up and you start the day, you got to figure out, how the hell do I get my next fix? That's a tough life. And as you walk the streets of D.C. or any city, and you talk to the folks who are homeless, there doesn't seem to be a lot of happiness there. There doesn't seem to be a lot of joy. And we know there's not a lot of happiness and there's not a lot of joy, because when we have been homeless or when we've been by ourselves in a jail cell, it's felt lonely as hell. It really feels, is life worth living? In many cases, we say, no, it's not worth living. What happens when you get into an Oxford House is an amazing thing. That first amazing thing is that 80% of the folks already living there say, hey, come on in, we vote you in. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Country clubs have lasted a long time. Fraternities have lasted a long time. Social clubs in big cities have lasted a long time because there's something special about getting voted in. It says to you, they want me. Everybody who comes into an Oxford House is voted in. And then when you get in, you have to make the judgment about the person who wants to get in. And sometimes that's a really tough decision because 3 or 4 people will be applying for the same vacancy. Somebody the other day asked me, what the hell is this term couched? And I explained that there's a lot of Oxford houses that get more applicants than they have beds for, and so they say, come live on the couch until there's an opening. Every Oxford house should be couching folks. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but I'll tell you the secret. It's profitable. If you get a couple of people on couches and you charge them the same as the rest of the people, you have to pay less. You can save the money for that big picnic, that big party. You can save the money for that bigger television. You can afford to get those 2 extra channels that were going to cost $14 a month. I'm a big fan of couching. But I'm also a big fan of expansion because we know that by expanding the number of Oxford houses, eventually there will be enough beds for everybody who needs one. And does everybody who's in recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction need one? Probably. Probably, because from day one, when we went to our first AA meeting or NA meeting, we heard people talk about avoiding people, places, and things. That's damn hard to do if you're living in the place you used to live when you were using. Damn hard to do if you used to living in a homeless shelter where they don't really put a lot of attention on the fact that you're going through a tough time. But when you get into an Oxford house, you suddenly have this surrogate family who is on the same page that you're on. And that's the beginning of self-reliance. And from that self-reliance, that's the beginning of self-respect. Because for each day that you go without taking a drug or using, it's a plus, it's a victory. For each day that you reach out and help somebody else, just to say hello to them. Or just to say, is that your toothbrush you left on the sink in the bathroom? You know, instead of pocketing it and using to clean your nails later on. Just those little gestures. Say to yourself, hey, that wasn't a bad thing I did. And I smiled at that SOB, even though he was rude as hell last night and burped at dinner. Those are big deals. And that's the big deal of beginning to care about each other and beginning to help each other recover from this terrible disease that we have. At this convention, we learn not only from experts, but we learn from each other about the miracle of Oxford House and the miracle of recovery. As a matter of fact, we've become large enough now, and we're on the right track enough now, that C-SPAN, that national network that covers Congress, the House and the Senate, asked to cover our first day of the convention. And they were here to record John Kelly's panel, to record the panel of experts that talked about addiction, and to record the panel that talked about our efforts to reach into the prison system to help people getting out of prison to have a decent place to live. when you all go home, you can mention to the folks in your house that they can watch those programs that you watch right here in person by turning on C-SPAN 2 and selecting the Oxford House tapes. You can go on the website for C-SPAN, put in under search Oxford House, and those tapes will pop up, and those tapes will pop up of the convention 2 years ago. And what will also pop up is when Steve Poland, Susan D. Giovanni, and Stanley Brown testified on Capitol Hill in 1987 before the Florio Committee. And the story in 1987 was exactly the same as it is today, and that is, here is an opportunity for individuals all over the country to make the transition from addiction to recovery. And it's not going to cost the taxpayers a lot of money. That helped. It helped in that Florio hearing to convince Congress that maybe they should have the Anti-Drug Abuse Act have a little provision that said each state should set aside a pot of money and loan $4,000 to a group that wanted to start an Oxford House. That original law mandated that. At the end of the Clinton administration, they were cleaning up as Clinton was leaving office to say, let's get rid of these mandates on the states. And Dr. Clark came to me and said, Paul, they're going to repeal that mandate in the Anti-Drug Abuse Act that says every state must have a revolving loan fund. And of course, one of the problems of being Irish, one of the problems of being arrogant, is I said, well, fuck them. If they don't realize Oxford House is a good thing, fuck them. So I have to admit to you that I'm the guy who's responsible for making that not a mandate. So there's only 18 states now that have that revolving loan fund. It's voluntary. Any state can do it. Or in other cases, like at the banquet last night, where we learned that Bill Harris was using some of Swede Hansen's money to create a revolving loan fund, giving us $25,000 and say, start that revolving loan fund for Colorado. Colorado is one of the states that does not have a revolving loan fund. Another state where we've been very successful in spite of the fact that there's no loan fund is Louisiana. What do we got, 140 houses? There's about 140 houses in Louisiana, and the reason that those houses got started is that the other houses pooled their resources and said, we'll make a loan to you. What the folks in Louisiana learned and what the folks in Colorado learned is if you don't rely on government, you never have to be disappointed because it's in your control. It's your self-reliance. And that's what eventually is going to make sure Oxford House stays forever. Yesterday afternoon, a number of states received the 100 Years Award. It's called the 100 Years Award to remind us that if we're going to last 100 years, we're going to have to do it ourselves. There's not going to be any magic fairy. There's not going to be any lottery we win. There's not going to be any manna from heaven. It's going to be that we figure out a way to support ourselves forever. And when we do that, quite like Alcoholics Anonymous, we will continue on and on and on. In AA, they have a rule that you can't make a contribution of more than $1,000 to AA over a lifetime. When we were starting the first Oxford House in 1975, there was an organization that was falling apart. A therapeutic community where people were fighting with each other, putting rattlesnakes in each other's mailboxes. And it's because that organization had gotten into all kinds of businesses to make all kinds of money. They had a car repair deal. They had a used car. They had a hotel they ran. And they accumulated a lot of money, and then they got fighting with each other over who got the money. We said, how can we deal with that? And John O'Neill, and who was around then, with a bunch of us, said the easy way to deal with that is just don't accumulate any money. And that's what we've done. Oxford House owns no property. It's stayed away from accumulating money. And that has helped us not to fight with each other over who's getting this or who's getting that. That's part of this self-reliance. And from that comes some self-respect. Every one of you can be proud of the fact that it's your efforts, your equal share of household expenses that keeps your house going. It's your efforts that take your house to the chapter meeting that keeps the chapter going. It's your chapters who help form state associations. It's your state associations that have conferences at your state level and come here to a national conference so that we can share with the country at large the fact that it's possible in a country where there's freedom for us to behave in a very responsible way and help ourselves by helping each other. And so that whole theme of self-reliance, self-respect, I think is a good one that was reinforced over and over and over again in this convention. Dr. Kelly from Harvard has a great reputation and was able to tell us about some of the latest research on addiction and came up with something that should encourage each one of us. And that is that if you stay clean and sober for 5 years, you're probably going to make it. And part of the reason that the numbers show that is that in Oxford House, the support is there until you don't need it anymore. There's no time limit. You can stay there forever. When Whit and I were close to that county-run halfway house, folks had to leave at the end of 6 months because there was a time limit. And we remember that 11 people had to leave in the 3 months that I was in that halfway house, and 10 of those 11 relapsed within 30 days. One guy, Ed Case, left, and Ed assured me everything was wonderful and it was good to get out of the goddamn halfway house where Frank told you what to do and how to do it and all this kind of stuff. Frank, the house manager, used to say, you gotta scrub the frying pan by going clockwise. And of course, all of us would go counterclockwise and say, Frank, John's going counterclockwise. And we tormented Frank. All of a sudden, we start this Oxford House, and we didn't have anybody to torment. But even more important, we didn't have a time limit. Ed convinced us he had not been affected by this time limit because he left, and he was clean and sober. And as I talked to Ed at the bus stop, he had an old beat-up briefcase, and he set the briefcase down, and the briefcase sprung open, and there was a half bottle of vodka, half-fifth. Ed, too, had relapsed. Why is that? Well, it may be that none of us are able to get clean and sober according to some time clock. It may be that you can't arbitrarily say 28 days, 14 days, 6 months, and you're going to be all better. The fact of the matter is each of us may be different, and we are. We know we're different. We brush our teeth different, we wash our hands different, we comb our hair different. We tie our tie different if we're a man, or if we're an old-fashioned man who still wears a tie, you tie it different. Because we're all different, the Oxford House group lucked into something. We said, damn it, you can live here forever if you want. As long as you don't drink, don't use drugs, and pay your equal share of expenses. We not only said that, but we tested it, and it happened time after time after time. James lived with a fellow at Northampton Street, Lou, who moved in 1977. He died there in 2005. We all went to Lou's funeral. He had led a good life, and he led it all living in Oxford House. As a matter of fact, that's in Washington, D.C. Lou had converted to Mormonism during his course of living at the house. 2 Mormons had visited the house and convinced him that he should become a Mormon, and he did. And so his funeral was at the Mormon church, and all of us from the Washington, D.C. area went to his funeral. And I got distracted a little bit because I started counting. I said, I wonder how many black people were here. There were 76 black people at Lou's funeral, and that, I bet you, set a record for the Mormon church at that time. That's a terrible thing. I'm going to do a little time for that. But in the meantime, Oxford House was setting an example that you could live there forever, because we did have folks live there forever. Arthur now lives at Delafield, and Arthur's lived in Delafield since 1984. And Arthur was in the U.S. Navy, had a tough life, got addicted. He's been clean and sober since '84. At one point, we had a little thing called the Oxford Recovery Club in D.C., and Arthur bought equipment to have a music program, and he still is at Oxford House, Delafield, and he still is clean and sober. For those of you who stay in Oxford House for any length of time, you do a service to all of us because you set an example. And you're able to pass on to the newcomer this notion of how it works, of how it takes an 80% vote to get in, but it only takes a 50% vote if we think somebody's using and we have to throw them out. How we elect officers, but we only have officers serve for 6 months because we don't want big bosses. As a matter of fact, everybody in that first Oxford House said there's no way that Malloy's going to be a boss in this house. There isn't any way we're going to elect him president. He would never give up the job. He's an egomaniac. Joe agrees with that. And so it was. There was this 6-month time limit. Well, that's been a godsend, because that means a lot of people in the House get the opportunity to come into leadership. Not only that, but it means that the big boss guy, whoever he is for the moment, is only going to be there for the moment. Because we share our strength, experience, and hope. We don't contract it out to some big boss. If you want a big boss, you join a gang, or you get to know the biggest guy in the prison cell. But if you want true democracy, you come into an Oxford House and you really push this idea that each vote counts the same. And part of the reason each vote counts the same is everybody pays an equal share of expenses. Now, I know there's a little variation from house to house. When the guy who's senior gets the best room and he pays $5 more a week because he's got a bathroom that's all his own. But those are the exception. As a general rule, we all pay the same because we push these equal rights sort of stuff. You all should be proud of being part of an organization that pushes and practices these kinds of things. I always say, as far as I ever know, we've never had a racial discrimination problem in an Oxford House. James usually reminds me that when he was voted into Northampton, there was 2 guys out of the 13 in that house who said, we don't want the damn nigger in the house. James took care of that by reading the manual. he became the only guy in the house that knew the manual word for word, paragraph by paragraph. In every house meeting, James would say, I notice on page 13 in the manual it says. And pretty soon, James was president of that house. And the two guys that didn't like him in the first place were able to come up to him and say, you know, I never knew it before, but you black people are just like white people. Really nice. Now, I don't know that it's Oxford House mission to solve all the racial discrimination problems in the world, but it is our mission to avoid falling into the trap of discrimination because we really believe in this equal stuff. When we had these breakouts, we used a lot of the breakout sessions to learn details about stuff that smart people could tell us and share with us. Medication in Oxford houses. Not only was Dr. Hoffman willing to spend his time, because he's a smart person and a doctor and knows all about that stuff, but many of you know about all that stuff because you've used every damn medicine there is. Somebody asked me once, does every house, Oxford house, have a PDF, physician's desk reference? I said, half the people in every Oxford house are PDFs. PDR, I guess it is, physician's desk reference.
Yeah. They're online.
I was just Canadian Club. I was not all that stuff, but Kathleen tells me all that stuff. You have to read about it. We also had special sessions of dealing with children in Oxford House. And the experts there are the people who deal with children. Because we have over 200 houses where mothers with children or men with children function day in and day out. And by sharing your experiences with each other, you strengthen the whole business of how that should be. Not every house should be a women's with children's house. Not every house should be a men's with children's house. But there should be some. And there should be understanding of all that we can help put not only our lives back together, but in many cases, put our families back together. We had another session about keeping alumni involved and forming alumni associations. Right from the beginning, we had Tradition 9, which said once you leave an Oxford House, you should stay and continue to be associated. That's easier said than done. People drift away and they don't stay, and they have to have a reason to stay. And now we're having states form alumni organizations where people are given that reason. They get together from time to time, enjoy each other's company, spend the first Saturday morning at Roy Rogers or Hot Shops or whatever restaurants are out there, now IHOP, and get to know each other and keep in contact. Those alumni associations are important because their experience, even though it's old-fashioned and may have happened a year ago or 10 years ago, can be helpful in problems your house has today. They can also be good folks for finding another couch to replace the couch with a broken spring in the living room. They maybe even can find a 55-inch flat screen television to replace that big old thing you got in the corner. So working with alumni and encouraging alumni associations, and we had this session at this convention to talk about that. We had a session at this convention talking about organizing personal finances. Every one of us who comes into Oxford House has blown our credit rating sky high. It ain't worth nothing. And yet, you can rebuild it. And people within the house have rebuilt it, and they share their experience, strength, and hope, and say, hey, get this $500 credit card, pay back when you're supposed to, and you begin to rebuild that credit. Those were big deal things. Those are things that are important to the Oxford House family, and we shared them at this convention. We also shared the nuts and bolts of finding a new house. Today, it's so much easier finding a new house than it was 50 years ago. For one thing, you got Zillow. You go on to that magic Zillow, and it shows you all the houses in the area. We used to have to drive the streets day after day looking for a sign to go up. And then we had to hustle the owner of the house and say, no, these people are not practicing alcoholics. They don't drink anymore. They're nice. They'll mow the lawn. You still have to do some of that, but it's easier finding a house today. But it does take work. It does take effort. And everybody in every house should keep their eye open. Is there a house down the street for rent? And if so, let's figure out how to get it. We talk about young people coming into Oxford House. When Whit and I were in that first house, Bill Conlon was the only young person there. He was 18 years old. He got all upset because we'd injured a cat, sent it to the vet, and then we voted not to take the cat back because the vet wanted to charge $400. So Bill was a whiner, and he went to his father and said, will you bail out the cat? Those terrible guys at Oxford House won't let the cat out of the vet. And of course he did. I went to Bill's father's funeral 10 years later, and the cat was still alive, walking around the rec room with his head like this. That's a terrible, cruel story, but we were cruel in those days. And we didn't have the $256 to pay for the cat. We didn't realize a broken neck cost that much at the vets. We do make change in order to continue being vital to the recovery community, and those changes are reflected in what we do with medically assisted treatment. I remember, and you probably remember, when the policy of Oxford House Inc. and at these conventions were you couldn't come in if you were on methadone. A drug is a drug is a drug. We've changed over time. We've changed over time because we hope that by coming in, if you take the methadone or the buprenorphine as prescribed, you eventually may become drug-free. And even if you don't become drug-free, you're going to become able to function normally because you're going to take the medicine as though it were a prescription. And you can only learn to do that if you're in a family like Oxford House, where everybody cares about everybody else. We also heard from John Major and others talking about research that's to come. In 1988, when Bill Splain did this study of Oxford House residents between 75 and 87, that was a big deal because nobody had researched anything about alcoholism or drug addiction. And when you talk to researchers, they say, how the hell can we research it? It's all anonymous. There's this Alcoholics Anonymous thing. There's this Narcotics Anonymous thing. But you can't study people if they're all going to be anonymous. Well, Oxford House let the researchers in. Bill Splain discovered that of 1,208 people who'd lived in Oxford House, 80% had stayed clean and sober. We said, my God, what are we doing wrong? We're losing 20%. He said, you don't understand. The best places in the country consider themselves lucky if 20% make it. And so quite to our surprise, we said, my God, this damn thing's working. And that was after 12 years. And so word of that began to spread, and that led in part to the 1988 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, where Congress said to states, put a pot of money out there and help these guys start houses. Well, that's one of the things that Oxford House has continued to participate in, and that is research. DePaul has published 286 articles. One of their studies followed 897 people in 219 houses across the country for 27 months. And they found only 13% relapse. Not bad. Not bad. Now, each house is different, obviously. We had a bed in several of the houses I was in that we thought was jinxed. The guy would relapse, we'd throw him out, we'd bring in another guy. That guy would relapse within 3 days. We brought in another guy. We decided maybe we should change the mattress or something. But that happens. But on the whole, damn few people relapse from an Oxford house. And sometimes when people relapse from an Oxford house, they go back out, drink and use drugs again, but sitting in a jail cell or in a lonely car or on the street, it dawns on them that the only time and the last time they were happy they were living in an Oxford house. Maybe they should figure out how the hell to get their ass back in. And a lot of folks do get themselves back into an Oxford house. And they do stay clean and sober the second or third time around. Nobody in Oxford house encourages that because you don't have to do that. There is no reason you can't stay clean and sober once you've moved into the Oxford house for the first time. But it's good for us to share that information here and everywhere else. Jackson and Jason have put together a great description about the core principles of Oxford House. And I'm sure that many of you went to that session. And it really drives home the point that there can be perfect houses and there are less perfect houses. And if you want to be the perfect house, follow the goddamn manual and do what it says. Brandy and others, Jeremy, those folks from Louisiana in particular, keep reminding us that you can have fun in an Oxford house. And while there were no dragons at this year's convention, I think Tinkerbell was here. And it is possible to have fun and have a good time in an Oxford house. And we need to share our ideas of how to do that. I know there are some houses that join bowling leagues. Well, nobody bowls anymore, I guess, but I don't know. I begin to worry because in our office, Daryl Joyner is a big bowler. But then at this convention, I heard he went to the golf tournament. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, my God, the world is changing. When Daryl goes from bowling to golf, you know there's been a big change. However, they told me afterwards he didn't really play golf, he just rode around in the golf cart. So I guess our bowlers are still safe. This business of working together with chapters and houses, it's been a continual battle from the day one when we organized chapters. We came up with chapters because suddenly there were more houses than John O'Neill and I could watch. And so about 16 or 17 houses, we said, oh, you got to organize into chapters. But the one thing has been consistent from the day the first chapter was organized, and that is it's up to each house. You don't have to belong to a chapter. But if you don't belong to a chapter, we encourage every chapter never to lend you any money, treat you like shit, make you feel real bad, have parties and don't invite you. So we hope that it's an attraction, not a mandate, that lets you come into a chapter. But once you get into a chapter, eventually chapters get too big. About 10, 12 houses, about as big as a chapter can be, then split into another chapter. And then when you get lots of chapters in a state, form that state organization. In the bag of material you got, there were 4 chapter manuals. The basic manual, the chapter manual, the manual for World Council, and the Manual for State Association. Share those with your people back in your house. Get to know them. Read the manuals yourself. Those are suggestions. We know long ago you can't tell alcoholics or drug addicts you got to do something. So it's all suggestions. But I'll tell you, if you follow those suggestions, this organization will continue to grow. We'll have conventions bigger and bigger. Soon we'll have to have stadiums. Soon we'll be able to attract more people to our conventions than Trump can to his speeches. I promised Jane I would only use the word Trump once today. Let me sum up the final summary of this convention by talking about our interaction with each other on so many different planes. One of the things that we have prided ourselves on is learning the big stuff, because the big stuff affects us. We listen to folks who explain how addiction works, how it's a brain disease. We listen to folks like Stuart Gitlow, who show us how it is that alcohol or other mood-changing drugs affects our brain. We listen as he talks about the fact that each of us as individuals are different. You know, I keep thinking some wear sunglasses, some don't wear sunglasses. I'm not a sunglass man myself. But I accept the fact that Gitlow says, hey, we're a little different. And so our normal feeling for each one of us is a little different level. And early on in life, when we begin to affect the level of how our brain works because we stick booze or drugs into it, it can get us hooked. If we're part of that 10% that gets hooked. See, one of the fascinating things about booze and drugs is that some people can use them and not get in trouble. Some people can drink booze and not become drunks. Some people can use heroin and not get hooked. And that creates a mystery for everybody else. And everybody else is likely to say to those of us who get hooked, why don't you shape up and fly right? Why don't you behave? And you know what? The answer is we can't behave because we're hooked. We're hooked because our brain says this stuff in my body is needed for me to function in an ordinary way. And the only way we get away from being hooked so that this stuff in our brain is necessary for us to be normal is to start all over again with learning how to live in an Oxford house. That Oxford house becomes the model family for us. The place where we can learn what feels good, feels bad, what makes us angry, what makes us sad, what makes us hungry, not hungry, what bothers us when the lawn isn't mowed, where we learn tolerance, that the folks living with us are like brothers and sisters. Some of them are lousy as hell, some of them can cook well, some of them have feet that smell. But damn it, it doesn't do me any good to get mad about that because that only affects me. And so I have to figure out how to be tolerant. And I have to figure out how to solve problems. I have to figure out how to make things work. And I have to figure out how to celebrate when the folks living with me do well. Boy, that's hard to do. But we do it. And we know that you folks right here this morning, on Sunday morning, at the end of this convention, are great examples of folks who are benefiting from living in an Oxford house. You're becoming, your normal is adjusted so it's normal without booze, without drugs. It's normal just because you're becoming decent human beings, because you've learned self-reliance, and that self-reliance has given you self-respect. as usual, we have a great banquet. And last night, Kathleen and all the troops put together a great meal and a great banquet. And then they had this speaker, a guy I've known for years, who gave this wonderful speech. But all during the night, all I dreamed of were these goddamn ducks. And when the ducks weren't causing me to move back and forth and up and down, then there were guys in a boat that said, "You gotta pull the oars." And I said, "But I'm not the physical type." They said, "Pull the oar." I guess it was when Jane woke me up when I'm yelling, "Whit, pull the goddamn oar." That's not my job. I think that this convention has warmed us all up for the next convention in Seattle. I understand there will be a brand new hotel out there in downtown Seattle. We'll be one of their first conventions coming into that hotel. I hope that they will do as good a job as the staff at this hotel, because this has been a well-served staff here that took care of us in first-class conditions. I also think that one of the things that as we go back home now and begin planning for the next year, we need to spend a bit of time asking ourselves, how can we make our neighborhood better? How can we make sure that there are enough houses in this town or this county for the people who need it? When we go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting and we see somebody who's living under lousy conditions, either with a spouse that they don't get along with, or on the street, or in a homeless shelter, or somewhere else, suggest to them they might want to think about Oxford House. And if you don't have vacancies, talk to a couple of your roommates and say, "Let's go rent another house." It is by giving away what we have that we become stronger. And I know that we can all look to that bird at the front of the V and say, let's just follow the way we're supposed to. But then we also should look at what can we do to help that poor bird at the front of the V. And I think what we can do to help is to continue to do our job as a resident of Oxford House. Do our chore when we're supposed to, pay the goddamn bills when we're supposed to, bring up at the meeting that Charlie needs to think about getting a cup for his coffee rather than spilling it all over the rug every time he walks from one room to the other. Those are the kinds of things that happen in well-functioning families. Nobody watched Father's Knows Best anymore, or the Brady Bunch, or any of that stuff. But I'll tell you, those old movies had some value in that everybody got along and everybody did things the way they were supposed to. That's the way Oxford House works best. Thank you all for coming, and I want to turn this meeting over to Kathleen to take us through one of the things that brings alive the fact that we are a family, as we remember those that were in our family who died during this last year. Kathleen.
Good morning, family. Did everybody have a good time last night? I always like Sunday morning because I always say Sunday morning is, everyone in this room is sort of the hardcore Oxford House recovery people. So I always get a really good energy before we go home. I used to bug Paul about Sunday morning and say, why do we have to do all that death stuff on Sunday morning? It's so depressing. Da, da, da. But over the years, I've really come to understand that it is one of the most spiritual things we do while we're here, remembering people that have moved on. Grief is an interesting thing. It can really show itself in so many ways. And I know that a lot of houses have experienced death this year, and a lot of you have experienced death this year. And I always share with people maybe some of that social work, SHIT, that Paul talks about that I do, that sometimes you have to take a little extra care of yourself when you lose somebody in a house. Sometimes you have to ask everybody around you a little bit more often how they're doing. Go to a few more meetings, talk to your sponsors and your other fellowship a little bit more. I've had an opportunity to experience a lot of death since I got clean. And from my parents to good friends to just all kinds of people. And it has been very difficult at times. But I always go back to the basics of what is my recovery program. I always throw myself into Oxford House and into service work, and that has worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but that has definitely worked for me. As you all are lining up, I think we have a microphone right there. If you have somebody you want to share about, you can line up behind that microphone. Is there another one, or is it just that one, Jackson, Jason? Just one. It's hard to see who's out there. So just one, okay. While you're doing that, I want to share a little bit about somebody that we lost in the Oxford House family in North Carolina this past summer. Really, she was an amazing person. She lived at Oxford House Brentwood, which was the first women's house that I ever worked with when Paul and Molly and James suckered me in to come into Oxford House to work. And I would go there every Sunday, and these women would, be a little dysfunctional, and then they'd sort of pull themselves together. One of the reasons that house worked was a woman named Loretta Hicks. And she passed away very suddenly in June this year. And what I realized is that particular woman probably helped to save many, many lives. She was a dear friend to me. She's really one of the main reasons I stayed with Oxford House. Early in Oxford House, sometimes money got a little tight, and you'd be driving around. It might be a little bit longer than a month you'd get reimbursed for this or that. And I would call her, and I would say, I don't know if I want to stay at that job. And she would say, what are you talking about? You get to ride around, smoke cigarettes. Back then, tell your story and help other people in recovery. There's no greater job in the world than that. And I would go, you know what, you're right. Minus the cigarette. But she was an amazing person. At her funeral, there was about a group of 10 women who started filing in the door that were a testament. They're all still clean, like 20 years later. They all lived together at this house. We had something very special, and I wanted to remember her this morning. So now I'm going to let you guys come up and share.
What is it? My name's Samantha. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. This morning, we were informed that we lost a sister in recovery in one of our houses. She was found at 2:30 this morning. So we just want to remember Brandy today and just wrap our arms around our family in chapter 3.
My name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to remember one of the pillars of Oxford House in Hawaii. His name was Rodney Macalino. He was a longtime resident and came to us one of the first classes of drug court there in Hawaii. And he was he's just really outgoing and had a lot of friends, in the island. I could never go anywhere with Mac without someone coming up to us and talking to him, whether in recovery or not. They were, we honored him this year by, the T-shirts that we were selling were a throwback. He designed it, and it's a Hawaii story, and it's about family. And but he passed away this year from pancreatic cancer, and he was sober. And you know, I had my own health issues, and I was in the hospital. And I couldn't talk, and my friend Mac was in the hospital, and he couldn't text, and so he's calling me, and I'm texting him, and you know, back and forth. But it was really touching because he had his own issues, and he was still continually reaching out to me. And I got to see him one time before last January, and we just laughed. He used to be my wingman, and I was a chapter president, and I'd pick him up. We'd drive to the chapter meeting, so he nicknamed my car Air Force One, and he would call me and just, you know, taunt me. And he was just a good guy, and he is well missed. And I'd like you guys to say a prayer for Mac tonight. Thank you.
My name's Scott. I'm an addict in recovery. I'd like to lift up Mr. John Short, who I like to look at it as got to go home to be with our Lord, the God of my understanding. No more pain, no more suffering. When I first got into the Revenant House, this man was on fire. He was very helpful. He was very accountable and held us to that standard. And to my understanding, he brought a lot of joy to his family, because now, after many years of alcohol abuse, now he no longer caused pain and suffering to his family. Now he brought them joy. And the way that I see it is that God called him a recovered addict back home, and that right there in itself is an honor. So I'd like to just give John Short, yes.
I'm David Jerkins, and I'm a man in long-term recovery from Fort Worth, Texas. And I'd like to bring to memory Christopher Coleman. Passed away in this last year. Truly one of my best friends, and also supported me as I grew in Oxford, chapter chair, and he was our secretary. And he was my wingman. I like that term. He was right there with me. We brought Chris in to the house. We had a very strong house, trying to follow the model as best we could, very tolerant. He was HIV positive and had been fighting autoimmune for over 15 years. He succumbed to that disease, sober, strong, and he became my friend. Truly will miss Christopher. We were able to dedicate our first Men with Children's House in Fort Worth to Christopher. It's our Coleman Bedford House.
Hey, I'm Mighty Mo from Tiny Tyler, Texas, Chapter 31. And we just found out this morning that we lost Don Green. He was a long-term member of our Foxglove House. When he relapsed, that house was showing signs of being sick, and we've brought that house back around. It's a really strong house again, but Don relapsed out, and some of us kept tabs with him, but he was pretty heavy back into his addiction, and he died alone. And it just really makes me thankful for the family that I have and for this organization. And we're just holding him in our thoughts and prayers today.
Good morning, family. My name is Nick Houston, and I am a recovering addict. I live here in Washington, D.C. One of our members at the house, William Murphy, passed earlier this year. And just like the woman said before me, he somewhat died alone. The only family he had was the Oxford House family. Apparently, the process of healing the fractured family that he did have did not happen quick enough. So he was amongst the brothers when he had his second stroke, and he had a long stay in the hospital, and he got his wings. So we just pray his spirit. Thank you.
I'm Justin from San Antonio, Texas. One of my best friends, Bailey Roush, died Thursday trying to get into Oxford over a heroin overdose. And if y'all could please keep him in y'all's prayers, that'd be great.
I'm Jamie, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I just want to send a shout out to Charlotte Brown. We lost her in May, and she's always with us wherever we go.
I'm Caroline from Louisville, Kentucky. I just want to remember Emily Welsh. She was from Oxford House, Cherokee Park in Louisville, Kentucky.
I'm Jeff Frost from Fairfax, Virginia, Oxford House, Fairchester Woods. I'd like to remember Bradley Haggerty. He helped open up our house last year around this time. He moved back from Texas to Fairfax from an Oxford house in Texas, and yeah, he lost his battle with heroin in February of last year. He was just a fresh of breath air. He loved Oxford House. He was just a vibrant person to be around. Never showed, he was just always happy. And he left behind a couple children and one unborn child. And just miss him very much. I know he's missed in Texas and in Virginia. Thank you.
I'm Shelley from Washington State, Chapter 1. June 21st, we lost Kat Summers. She opened the Agape House, and her 22nd birthday was last week, so.
My name is Chris. I'm from Chapter 1 in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm an addict in recovery. I would just like to remember Eric Smith this morning. On August 7th, I got a text from a roommate that he had passed away. And the irony was that the day before, my son had just been born. So my first son was born. One quick anecdote about Eric that I'd like to share is that our house is prone to flooding, and he emptied the shop vac 36 times alone. I wasn't there that day. So he helped guide me through a lot of the things through the house about, the manual. And I just wanted to remember him this morning. Thanks.
My name is Frank from Manassas, Virginia, Thomas 2 Oxford House. I'd like to remember our friend and brother, Jason Bailey, who died of an overdose earlier this year. Very nice, kind person, and he left his family behind, which were very hurt by the incident. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is James. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and I'd like to remember Kevin Danker. We lost him in an Oxford house. He was a roommate of mine briefly, and he was a very caring and giving man, so thank you.
My name is Nick, alcoholic and addict. I'd like to remember John Paulson, who died sober in a Kansas City, Missouri Oxford house this year. He was really a great guy.
Morning, family. My name is Jackson Long in long-term recovery. In Texas, we may not have been hit as hard by some of the northeastern states with the opioid epidemic, but we're still being affected. Over the last 15 months, we've had 9 overdoses due to opioids. 3 of those were fatal, but 3 of those, the person was saved because we had Narcan in the house and they knew how to use it. So make sure you have Narcan in the house. In fact, in the Austin community, there's been an overdose in the community, not in Oxford House, but they knew that Oxford House had the Narcan, so they brought them to the Oxford House so their lives could be saved. So we can save lives too.
I'm Jamie and I'm an addict. I live at Oxford House, Brookview, and I just want to be in remembrance of my kid's father named Dean Daniels. He died in an alcohol-related car crash on July the 7th, a year ago. Thank you.
My name is Daniel from Bremerton, Washington. We had a fellow move into our house straight out of prison, or he was in work release, and we didn't get a real good chance to know him. His name was Marcus, and he came home one night from after being in the hospital for 2 days, and so there were some things a little off with him, so those behaviors were a little bit off, and that one more time didn't really work for him. It was mentioned several times this weekend, and so about 3 weeks later, he was found alone in a McDonald's bathroom. And so one of our housemates was really good friends with his family, and so just want to remember him and sending love to his family. There were young children that his sister had, his nieces and nephews, and so he was really close with them. So him and all the other countless people who didn't make it into these rooms and into this conference. I just want to remember them.
My name's Sam. I'm a grateful recovering addict. I want to remember Corey Wells this morning. He's a good guy. Had a lot of troubles when I first got into Grants Pass, and he just kind of took me under his wing, and we became pretty close, and we lost him this year, so I just want to be in remembrance of him. Hi, I'm Haley Roach. I'm from Wichita Falls, Texas, and I wanted to remember Dante Robertson. He used to live in Oxford House, Big Bend, and he was waiting to go to treatment again and got murdered on the streets.
Hey, my name is Todd Westmoreland. I'm an alcoholic, and I'd like to remember Michael Moore. He was a housemate of mine and a really good friend. He died sober, actually. He died of a massive heart attack one Saturday morning with his family. He celebrated 8 years of sobriety that Friday before, and I was very fortunate, feel very fortunate to have been there with him and was able to tell him, that I really cared about him, that I appreciated, everything he's done for me. And obviously, there's no bosses in the Oxford houses, but he was one of the leaders in our houses. So again, I'd like to remember Michael today.
Hi, my name is Jen Field. I'm a woman in long-term recovery. I live in a house in Newark, Delaware. And I want to remember a few people. We have been hit really, really hard in our area, in the Northeast Corridor. And I want to remember Jay Alfine. He left his Oxford house to go to work and decided to get one more, and died alone next to a train track and sat there for a couple days. I want to remember Robert Smith III, who also made a decision living in an Oxford house to go out and get one more. Was in a coma for a few months and then taken off life support and died. Jill McGonigal, who lived in an Oxford house for a long time, moved out successfully, made a decision to get one more. And her funeral is this week. And someone that we just lost Friday night who was actually found in an Oxford house, Jacob Southern. And I just want to say that, if you're living in an Oxford house and you feel like you can't tell somebody that you want to get high, please know that that is a lie. And you do not have to use even when you want to.
I'm Angela. I'm in long-term recovery. I'm from Kentucky, but I'm now in Indiana. I want to remember Susan Proctor. She came to our house straight from prison, and there were some health issues that she was having in prison, and they told her it was one thing, but it was cancer, and by the time that she passed in May, it was in her brain, and she died clean. And I also want to remember all the people that we have lost that were unnamed in the last year because they hadn't found what we found.
My name is Elena Bracey. I'm from Lenexa, Kansas. I want to remember my aunt, Norma Tyner. She just passed away about 3 weeks ago. She used for years, and her heart just finally gave out on her. Also, my friend Billy Falmer, he got clean for about a year and then decided to use on his birthday, and that one time he overdosed and died. And my roommate, who I spent like 3 months with in rehab, and she also overdosed on heroin. Her name was Emily. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mandy Strickland, and earlier this year we lost a man named David Cooper. He was only with us for a few weeks. I had gone to rehab with him, and we both moved into Oxford at about the same time. And he relapsed out after a couple of weeks and died in an alcohol-related car crash a couple weeks after that. And just, you know, he was one of the ones that didn't quite get it yet. But he had always said that if he went back out again, he would die. And I wanted to take a moment and remember him.
I'm Bo Carpenter from Great Bend, Kansas. I'd like to remember Dakota Gray. He was in a house with me for a couple months, decided to go back out and ended up taking his own life under the influence. So.
Rob Henderson, Delaware, ex-World Council. I'm here to tell you about a friend of mine, Matthew O'Hop, 37 years old, was battling his alcoholism, thought he'd like to smoke a joint. It was laced with fentanyl. We buried him 2 months ago.
My name's Andrea. I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, and a few months ago we buried a gentleman by the name of Brent Hale from one of our houses. He was just going to go out and get one more.
I'm Brooke. I'm from Nebraska, and I kind of got a list here. So Andy, Bobby, little Mikey, Trevor, Hillary, and Garrett. And I just want to say, by the grace of God, there go I.
I'm Michael. I'm an addict from St. Louis, and I'm extremely blessed that I'm here. I've only been in Oxford House since February, and I was voted in to be able to come here. And I have a message from one of our more seasoned persons in St. Louis, that Ralph Tyler, who was an amazing person in St. Louis, was all in. He was all about Oxford. Our chapter is forever changed and lost a great man, a classy gentleman that won't be forgotten and paved the way for so many coming into our chapter. He paid attention to every detail, was always dependable, and he passed away in his sleep, a clean man.
My name is Luke Henderson. I'm from Newton, Kansas, the Bass House down there. And my stepdad, Joe Robbins, was in the Bass House last year for about a week, and it just wasn't the right thing for him. Well, on Monday, he tried to commit suicide, and on Tuesday, it was successful. I just ask we remember him, and the addict's still out there suffering. Thank you.
Morning. I'm an alcoholic named Art Moore, and this morning I'd like to remember a past friend and housemate named Jerry Richards. He moved into our Tyson's Corner Oxford House in 2014, and we buried him this past summer. He died of natural causes, and because of Oxford House, he died clean and sober after 5 years.
My name is Willie. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I want to remember a young lady named Kristen Sasha. Her death just kind of reminded me of one of the great things about Oxford, about how there is no time limit on how long you can stay in Oxford, as long as you pay your ES, don't use, and no disruptive behavior. But also to the many men and women that are nameless and don't have those to remember them. But I know that Oxford has been one of the biggest families I've seen so far. So.
Thank you all for sharing, and I'm going to turn this back over to Paul. Or do you want me to go ahead and do the tradition? We can do the tradition? You want to pick up your tradition cards off your chairs if you don't know them by heart yet?
I think one of the things about Oxford House is in remembering those who died during the past year is it kind of underscores the fact that we are a human family. We all have a limited amount of time on earth, but it underscores the fact that Oxford House day in and day out is so important for so many. And I think this tradition in some respects is kind of morbid that we end our great conference with remembering those who died. But on the other hand, it reminds us that we're human, we're fallible, and we're damn lucky. With that, let's read our traditions, which is the closing of our convention. And on your chair is a little card, Oxford House Traditions. 1, Oxford House has as its primary goal the provision of housing for the alcoholic and drug addict who wants to stay clean and sober. 2, all Oxford houses are run on a democratic basis. Our officers serve continuous periods of no longer than 6 months. 3, no member of an Oxford house is ever asked to leave without cause, drinking, drug use, or disruptive behavior. 4, Oxford House members realize that active participation in AA and/or NA offers assurance of continued sobriety. 5, each Oxford House should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other houses or Oxford House Inc. as a whole. 6, each Oxford House should be financially self-supporting. 7, Oxford House should remain forever non-professional. 8, propagation of Oxford House concept should always be conceived as public education. 9, members who leave Oxford House in good standing should become associate members. Have a safe trip home. See you all in Seattle next year.